Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at the very important development in the country with reference to, of course, the Field Tribunal Court-Martial proceedings against Lieutenant General Faiz. And of course, this is something that is extremely important in the case of accountability that, of course, has been risen as a matter of concern in society and discussions. While, of course, we talk about the political elements involved in various aspects that damage the interests of the country, there has been a lot of conversations around, particularly in the aftermath of May 9th, against what sort of action will be taken against the military institutions and the armed personnel, and of course the retired military officers as well, who have been connected with regards to certain aspects and measures. And this is important, especially when we take a look at the way that this is now, of course, going to proceed and what actions are going to be taken with reference to the Pakistan Army Act and the military courts. But what a lot of the people have been saying, particularly coming in from the government side, is the fact that this is something that the institution has taken up itself and points towards the self-accountability of the institution, and also ends this long-standing perception that there is a lack of accountability or consequence for people involved with the military or the armed forces. And so we've now seen that because of this, there has been more concern with reference to how this is going to proceed forward. And then, of course, with the way that we've seen this proceed further, there has also been arrests made after General Faiz's arrest, and 3 more retired military officers have been arrested. Of course, there's names and designations have not really been given the details of, but we will be, of course, seeing how exactly this will proceed further, particularly when we also keep on hearing news about how more arrests are also coming and potentially will also link to the kind of political connections that have been spoken about in the past. And this is something that the Information Minister has also spoken about, where he emphasized that it is quite clear that there is a lot of evidence with reference to the political collusion that existed and the actions which the military institutions and the then ISI chief has taken on the behest of a political party. Or they're saying that these words are very, very important when we take a look at the current scenario. And then, of course, the way that these links bring back to the PTI founder and the party in itself. So what exactly will be the role and the connection that is made in this regard, and what that means in terms of accountability and court proceedings is also important, and what we will be seeing both on the military and the civil front regarding this matter is going to be important. So that's going to be our focus in the show today, where we'll try to understand how exactly will this process move forward, and what arrests can we expect, and how exactly do we see the situation evolving, particularly with reference to both military and political leaderships. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by Senior Analyst Raja Faisal, and we've also been joined online by Dr. Niaz Murtaza, who's a political analyst. We've also been joined by Brigadier Retired Mr. Waqar Khan, who's a Senior Analyst, and then we've also been joined by Brigadier Rashid wali janjua, who's Director Research IPRI. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. And Dr. Niaz, I'm going to start with you with reference to what we've seen, and of course, particularly in the aftermath of General Faiz's arrest. We've spoken a lot about the May 9th incident, and then, of course, moving forward, the accountability since then. And while, of course, there has been a lot of concern with reference to the actions that have been taken against the political parties, particularly, of course, PTI, there seems to be a perception that there isn't the same sort of action or pace of action with regards to the military institutions as well. But now with General Faiz's arrest, and the fact that he is, of course, somebody who was at one of the top positions of the military institutions, does this point towards any progress with reference to self-accountability of the military institutions?
Well, I think in some ways, yes. Because the ISPR, press release spoke first of all about, the top city scandal, but then, there were a few other interesting lines about, his, violations of other, codes of the Army Act, etc. And it did not really specify what, but if you look at, media, social media, it's very clear they are alluding to the same kind of things that you're talking about, his involvement in politics, and that too in terms of, supporting the PTI. So all that is fine. I think there is huge circumstantial evidence, common sense evidence that he was doing that, and especially with relationship to the May 9th incident. But then the question is, did he suddenly wake up and start supporting PTI from May 9th onwards? That would certainly not make sense. It means that he had an ongoing relationship with the PTI, which many people say preceded the 2018 elections and so on, and then his support to PTI during those elections, after the elections, to keep the PTI government running. So is this accountability only going to be about his actions from May 9th onwards, or will they also be looking at all those actions preceding May 9th? Because obviously his ties, his relationships with PTI are very strong. And if it's something which covers everything, then that would be welcomed. But then was he acting alone on his own, or he had, the go ahead from, other quarters? Is that going to be looked upon? And then the most important thing is that, is it only this person, who's been involved in political interference? The ultimate objective is that this perception that the army interferes in politics, that should end. And if he did that, and if he was the only one, and if he gets punished, that's fine. But if there is also a perception that these things are still continuing, from other officers, then if the army is looking to really create, clear up its image, that it's not into political interference, then if it doesn't take action, and if it doesn't stop what many people are saying is continued political interference, in fact, heightened political interference, then the purpose of the whole exercise might get lost. It would still be good that at least this person will get punished, because he is one of the most notorious ones. But then there has to be an end to this whole exercise, given the long history of the unfortunate Pakistan has of repeated military interference into politics. So I think the military should step back and take a harder look at what the overall picture is.
Absolutely. And Brigadier Janjua, these are important points, especially when we talk about true self-accountability and justice. And while, of course, that direction seems to have been taken with reference to these arrests, but it will be, of course, important to see whether this is not just a perception of justice and accountability, but actual accountability and justice in itself. Do you think that that is possible if this is something that is restricted to General Faiz and his associates, or those involved, or will that go to the larger context of the institution itself? Because of course this is somebody that we're talking about sitting at the top position of ISI, and that is of course a very, very important position to be held, and then of course various others that he was also part of. And so this is not obviously something linked only with BDI on May 9th. Of course this actual case pertains to the top city housing scheme in itself. But when we talk about political collusion and the fact that the statement of the ISPR says that the actions taken at the behest of a political party, that's important in terms of pointing towards the involvement from the political side and action taken against that. So do you think that there will be true accountability in that sense, where we don't only see certain individuals targeted, but also everybody who's linked with the actions that have been taken for which this action is taken?
Thank you very much, Anna.
Right, Janjua Sahab, I lost you a little bit. Can you please unmute yourself? I heard you in this beginning, but I've lost you again. Can you go ahead now?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Right. So this process of accountability was started by Army itself, and Army started it because it felt that there was an individual, regardless of the exalted rank, he was in breach of military law, and there were certain strictures imposed upon him that he could not participate in any political activity for 2 years after retirement, and he was clearly in breach of those strictures. So those, he attracted the manual of Pakistan military law. So it is a very simple formulation on that score. But what another participant, Mr. Murtaza, said, I think it's a larger issue. We have to view things on a larger canvas. Now, accountability as an institution for political interference. That is also institutional responsibility and the responsibility of the principals, because if we apply the principal agent framework, the military is the agent and the principals are the civilians to which it works. So if the politicians are ready and the politicians are resolute and they have the requisite conviction and requisite desire to conduct the accountability, then they must take army away from those tasks which involve army in those. Because we know that this political cell was created by a civilian prime minister, Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And it is on record that, in fact, the military agencies are used for those purposes by the sitting government. When the prime minister orders agency head to do something, and that responsibility on us lies on the civilian prime minister to ensure that the order is lawful. Having said that, yes, the institutional inquest has started, and I'm sure it will lead to many other, convictions. There is a whole string that is involved, and all those who are involved would be put in the dock. So when that thing is done, an example is set, and it acts as a deterrence for future such breach of law and breach of norms. But the institution itself is very clear. It is the breach of MPML, and it attracts the requisite provisos of Pakistan military law. And a field general court martial is only ordered after a court of inquiry is already over. That court of inquiry, as we know, it also examines the witnesses, evidence, and then recommends whether these charges attract or merit a general court martial, a field general court martial, or a summary disposal. So in this case, a field general court martial has been recommended by the court of inquiry, which means that there was evidence. And other, contextual elements, they clearly point out that the officer concerned, he was in breach of certain laws that do not permit a retired officer within 2 years to enter into a kind of a hobnobbing with political party and start acting against the institutional interest of the institution itself, so much so that it amounts to subversion of the loyalties of the cadre and, instilling a kind of a disillusionment and a kind of a revulsion against the institution amongst the retired cadre as well. Because army is a, cohesive entity which lays a great store, which sets a great store by institutional harmony, ready corps, and camaraderie. And we have examples of 1971 war and so many other events that despite all those difficult situations and setbacks, this camaraderie and cohesiveness never broke down. This is an exception where in love of a populist party, some senior ranking officers, they fell for that, and out of their own ambitions, they forged linkages with those, and they started, resorting to conspiracies. And I was frankly amazed that the kind of planning that went into that uprising on 9th of May, and how people were directed to those locations where the civilians normally balk at going, that it was a clear imprint of a guiding hand that knew that was an insider and that was giving encouragement to those, activists who were quite violent, quite, emotional, and those emotions were, misdirected. And it was because of that the acts of violence were committed. So if those charges stick, then it is a very serious offense. It is tantamount to subverting the loyalties. And we have examples in the past officers have been punished for mutiny, for sedition, espionage, and trying to launch a coup d'etat against a civilian government in case of General Tajammul Malik, in case of General Zahir Abbasi. Then the Rawalpindi conspiracy case is also an example where the CGS, Major Akbar Khan, was involved. So all those officers were indicted and they were punished as per the law. So this is no exception. But the only difference is that this time it was more planned, it was more political, and it leveraged the insidious impact of the social media, which created a very dangerous, poisonous paranoia amongst the...
And Brigadier Janjua, I'll come to the social media aspect as well, because I want to talk about that in further detail. But before that, let me also take Brigadier Waqar's perception into the debate, because Brigadier Waqar, I want your take on the issue as well, particularly when we talk about accountability within the military institution. While, of course, there are examples that Janjua Sahab was giving us from the past, and of course, with the way forward that we're seeing, at least there is some sort of action that has been taken. But again, I want your perception in terms of what exactly will be the way forward as a system in itself, because we see, of course, that there has been statements coming in with reference to how this is not a matter for the military institutions anymore, that in principle this is not something that the army actually stands by in terms of interfering in political affairs. And of course, we've seen that in the past happen, and there is, of course, evidence of that as well. And so I want your take on how exactly will this case in particular be able to support the army stance of not interfering in the political affairs of the country, because of course, at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve is self-accountability and consequence of someone's actions, but also improvement of the system in itself and prevention of any such acts in the future.
And Brigadier Waqar, if you can also highlight the fact about whether this case is about supporting a political party or it is entirely about betrayal of the comradeship.
Yeah, I think first I'll just comment on the continuity of accountability. As I think Brother Rashid wali said, it has been a process, and it could be minor offences, it could be major offences. The accountability process is almost 365 days of the year. And so this is one thing, it's something new. The only thing is the gravity of, this less case of General Faiz Amin. And in my opinion, although I think the ISPR press release does indicate that there is evidence against him, it is already established, they are in the process of feedback, which may take maybe short days or less than that. But then, of course, there is a network which is also being unearthed. So I'm sure as people are caught, you'll hear more news about that. Now, as far as General Faiz's conduct is concerned, one is, of course, before retirement, which relates to his in-service, extortion of money or whatever, or corruption related to Top City, which went to the Supreme Court, the applicants, and then directed finally the military or Ministry of Defense. So one is related to that. Again, it's a criminal offense in case it is proven. The other is post-retirement conduct. You are, as Rashid said, for 2 years, you are not supposed to take part in politics of any kind. You can only vote. But even after that, in case you are, especially of a senior rank on a sensitive appointment you've served, then you should be very, very careful on your conduct. Now, in case it is related to, it's a very serious thing. This is assault on the state. It's not only breaking of the camaraderie between retired and serving officers. It was, in case, as the news is coming, it is related to 9th May or colluding with party to, let's say, break the chain of command or assault the military itself. So this is, I think, very, very serious, with definitely punishment which can end into capital punishment also. But we don't know exact charges. The network which has been unearthed so far, the 3 officers, they were very close to him. And it means that it's not only him, it's going to be a network, and I'm sure we're going to listen to more stories about that. Army has always set up, a bar of accountability, and this time is going to be very, very high. As you said, that when the accountability process starts and then you culminate it, you set a very high bar for any serving officer today or retired officers tomorrow and the veterans that we cannot cross certain red lines, rules and regulations within service and out of service. And anybody doing it, irrespective of his rank or holding a very sensitive appointment, he'll be basically taken to task in case he's. Again, he has the right to defend. He can definitely, I'm sure he's having a counsel who will defend himself. And later on, he has a right to appeal, right of appeal to the chief, followed by High Court and Supreme Court. But normally, even if he has committed that big crime, an officer would, in case incremental evidence is presented, he should actually accept it and become guilty instead of, just prolonging it. So maybe that could be just a small little thing that he can do as an officer. Otherwise, I'm sure the military has the evidence. Now it comes to in case there are other people involved, like some political figures or people from other institutions. Like we have now some news coming about Diyala jail, staff aiding and maybe becoming part of this network. So I'm sure they are also going to be roped into this trial, and hopefully it will be a military trial in case they are involved. So things are, I think, very, very critical. But if you look at the reception the Army Chief gave to the ex-chiefs and senior officers, like Chairman Joint Chiefs were there, ex-Army Chiefs were there, I'm sure he took them into confidence because, and he shared it. And by and large, the news is that they endorsed that this cannot be allowed in military because, God forbid, although the people of Pakistan center of gravity, but by and large, our enemy thinks that Pakistan Army or military is the center of gravity. And in case it is dented, it actually starts affecting the very existence of Pakistan. So I would say it was a very, very dangerous game in which they were venturing. But since all the details are not there, these are analysis based on whatever is coming to media or maybe certain hints from what ISPR has said. I think stakes are very high and Army is coming very hard. And inshallah, it will lead to, I'm sure, better discipline within the Army, a high bar of accountability, and a lesson for anybody in the future.
Yeah, with your permission, Sana, wanted to go towards Dr. Niaz. Dr. Niaz, of course, overall, if we look at the political parties, isn't it a great lesson for the political parties themselves that in future, of course, if there is a group of the retired army officers and the ones who have recently retired from the service, wouldn't it be good to stay away from them? Because in this whole case, the whole episode of 9th May, it seems as if somebody who was of close to the ranks of the army at that time, they actually influenced the political party to go to this length?
Well, in philosophy, there's a very deep and long-standing question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Similarly, there's a very deep and long-standing question in Pakistani history, which came first, the civilian mistakes or the political interference of the army? And if I look at history, what I see is from 1958, Pakistan has either been ruled by generals or by those political parties whose founders were brought into politics by generals while they were ruling. So who do you assign more, blame to? That is the first question. Then the second question is, again, as I said, if this is all going to start from May 9th onwards, his actions from then the general perception that, the civilians will see is that, the institution is only concerned if the person's actions boomeranged against the institution, but it's not concerned about his other actions which undermine the civilian institutions like the judiciary, the parliament, the executive, the election commission of Pakistan. What about his involvement in 2018, and what about the involvement of other people in the elections of 2024? So the army is such a well respected institution, such a critical institution, that I fully support their action to uh, clean up the army's image. And in order to help them do that, I would encourage them to not just focus on his actions from May 9th onwards, and not just his actions, but also look at whether, all this is still going on, or whether all that will be taken up by, the next generation of the army high command. So I think that is the thing that has to break. I remember, a couple of years ago, General Bajwa had made a promise that, army interference in politics will end, and General Asim Munir had also made similar promises. So, if, let this be an opportunity. Okay, this is the end. Whoever is interfering in politics, whether it was before us or now, all of that will end, and we will stick to our professional duties and let politicians handle it, and they'll find a way to sort out things. So this is the most important thing. If a long lasting sustainable change has to come, it should not be just one person or his coterie, other people, like the Chakwal junction as it is being called now, but a holistic look at everybody who's been involved with supporting any party, not just PTI, also, PMLN, any other party, and then, take drastic action. I think that will really help Pakistan as well as the institution.
Absolutely.
Sana,
And
with your permission,
yes.
I just wanted to add in something. Of course, we are seeing on the social media, everyone is, of course, generalizing Chakwal as a region. I must say, Chakwal is a place from where, thousands and thousands of people, they've given their lives for this country. And I think not a single city on the basis of this, just one single act, should be sort of generalized for it.
Of course, that's important, definitely. And speaking of social media, I was just going to go to Brigadier Janjua regarding that. And Brigadier Sahab, I want your take first also on what Dr. Niaz has said in terms of this overarching possibility of a more comprehensive way that the military can actually look at the current situation. And then secondly, in terms of social media, we've seen a lot of references made from the ISPR and from the government as well of digital terrorism, and this of course is a very important aspect anyway in our fight against terrorism, but a lot of it also points towards involvement coming in from the political elements within the country as well, who might be using that for their own interests or interests that damage the country's future. And so I want your take on how you think that when we talk about accountability by the military institutions, will this be linked in terms of those aspects of digital terrorism that from one political domain or the other have come out in the front and have harmed the interests of the country, have targeted the military institutions themselves, have run campaigns that malign the images of the top leaders of the military or our institutions as well. And then of course how that again has been spoken about in terms of actions that have been taken perhaps in the knowledge of or in the collusion of certain military elements as well. And so I want your take on how exactly will that be taken into account as well.
You see, with great power comes great responsibility. The former DG ISI, who's been now hoist with his own petard, he's got his comeuppance because he crossed certain lines. I think none in the hierarchy told him to resort to those acts in fulfillment of his personal objectives and create a coterie and hatch conspiracies which would attract charges of this nature. So this is a lesson for us. And the answer to the question whether it was civilian or the military intervention, I think Hamza Alvi has answered this question decades ago when he formulated his overdeveloped state and underdeveloped polity hypothesis. And that has been our undoing because there was a constant environment, high threat environment, weak political institutions, instability. And then what SC Finer writes in The Man on the Horseback, that the propensity and the predilection on part of the most organized entity with the means of violence at its disposal was with that. Because unless the man on the horseback willingly accepts the civilian supremacy and internalizes that philosophy, the imbalance remains. And unfortunately, in Pakistan's case, that imbalance remained. We can keep discussing whether that imbalance was a consequence of civilian failures, their weak internal democracy, their weak democratic credentials and leadership, or it was a case of military's overweening ambition. But all said and done, nations learn, and equipoise has to be attained at some point. I think a kind of a concordance is emerging between the political elite, the military elite, and the people, so that each institution or each organ of the state should remain and contribute within its own ambit. Even in countries like United States, the bastions of democracy and most of the civil military literature flew from there. Nowadays, there is a great talk of integration. Rebecca Schiff and there are other civil military theorists who argue that the classic separatist mode of objective control and subjective control will not work. Something according to the environment has to be created, wherein there are stakes for the military that they are decision maker, they partake in decision making process, and the civilians allow them that space so as to accept the responsibility. Because if the military does not take part at all, the other institutions work in splendid isolation. We know the kind of fractured polity, the kind of threats, internal and external environment. So all those factors have to be considered, create a kind of a balance between the relations. And yes, that balance is much needed. And these acts of accountability, internal cleansing, and creating punishments as deterrents. So this acts as a template for future. And I'm sure we are on a learning journey as a nation, and this would come as a very important marker of civil-military balance as well, because the civilian principals must understand and accept that they have to use the military as an institution, as an instrument for the purpose it has been designed. And if they wish to use military for the purposes that it is not designed, then they should be ready to pay the price as well. Regarding digital terrorism.
Yes, please go ahead, Janjua Sal.
Digital terrorism has become a veritable Achilles heel for a country like Pakistan, because nowadays one of the principles of war is the public support, and the public support is premised upon internal cohesion. And internal cohesion, there is no better way of subverting nowadays than by these social media platforms. These algorithm led campaigns, they are so scientific that they point at those cleavages and those vulnerable points that trigger violent acts, that trigger subversion, and they create a kind of a disinformation logic bubble in which the logic takes a backseat, and seemingly the right-minded persons, they also get converted to the cause of the terrorist, to the violent extremist, and the political extremist. This is exactly what happened. A party which started with a promise of change, it metamorphosed into a populist party with a populist narrative, promising moon but delivering nothing, and then concentrating on polarization, us versus you. So this message of hate, calumny, and continual barrage of scurrilous utterances against the institution, against the institutional leadership, against the rival political leadership, that vitiated the entire environment in which no sane discourse could take place. So this was very, very dangerous thing which destroyed the national harmony and cohesion. And when that happens, there are external forces which are inimical to Pakistan, which are always ready to fish in the troubled waters. They start funneling the resources, they start working with their proxies, and they create further complication. So I think this digital terrorism, we may use more finesse in tackling this by coming up with better narratives, by shaping our reality rather than fighting the reality. And instead of creating firewalls like these, which cut off from the world, I think we need to have a better technical solution to go for the targeted.
This last point is extremely important, Janjua Sahab. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes, Faisal.
Yeah, Sana, I wanted to go towards Brigadier Waqar. Brigadier Waqar, as of course light has been shed by Brigadier Janjua on the aspect of digital terrorism we have been experiencing since more than almost 2 years now. Can we say that in this particular case, of course, these very people plus some of more will be probed related to the kind of concocted stories which were being flourished within the social media that actually fueled a sort of morale of the forces. It was going on just because of the fake stories, the concocted stories which were being pushed into. Can we say that behind them stories we can see this kind of element and these kind of people who were, of course, captured this time around?
And Brigadier Waqar, add to that what Janjua Sahab mentioned at the end, especially when we talk about social media accountability or in terms of action taken against digital terrorism. How does that play out with the way that we're going to be able to move forward with allowing people to go ahead and use social media, very important, of course, for the IT industry or other industries in the entire country that unfortunately are being affected, and also in terms of how we can do the action against digital terrorism without control on social media, unnecessary control on social media. I think unfortunately we might have lost Brigadier Waqar. I'll try one more time. Brigadier Waqar, can you hear me? Dr. Niaz, I would like you to please take this question and share your views.
Well, I mean, this is, the balance that all societies are struggling with, the good use of social media, and then, the unfortunate fact that, these kind of, mediums do get misused. So, as a progressive, person with a progressive ideology, I would err, in terms of, going towards more freedom. And then within that freedom, trying to, make sure that, you give the other side of the story so that, people who are trying to, fool people, spread lies, get countered rather than, controlling social media in such a brutal way that, you can hardly work on the internet now. It's so slow. There are so many interruptions, and that all has, a huge economic cost. So, I think we should again look at the larger picture of all actions that we take. If, we try to build this firewall and it starts affecting our economy, then, we will end up, harming ourselves more. And then overall, I would say, these kind of actions against individuals are important, but then prevention is more important than cure. And the, fact that these kind of political interference from this institution happens so frequently, it raises the question of about, what is it there in the informal, norms, culture, learning, at least within the higher echelon, which makes so many officers inclined to, do this kind of political interference. So there has to be a change of culture within the higher echelons of the army. Punishing people is not enough. And then there is also the question of what to do with ISI. There's always this talk of, whether it should be given to civilians. If that's not possible, then at least end its political role so that it just focuses on military and security issues and has no role in politics.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Niaz, for joining us, and thank you very much, Brigadier Janjua, for being part of the discussion as well, and thank you, Faisal, for always being part of the debate. That's all that we have time for, and of course, we're going to be continuing our discussion with news from Pakistan and around the world. Stay tuned to PTV World.